So, welcome back to Anarchapulco. I got Larken Rose here. So, Larken Rose is one of the anarcho-capitalists who inspired me most. So, the first question, Larken, why do so many people fall to the politicians?
Well, they're basically trained to be scared. They're trained to think that they can't handle life on their own, that they and their neighbors and family can't handle life on their own. And the politicians are constantly spreading the message that the world is a dangerous, scary, complicated place and normal people can't possibly handle it. So what you need is a big ruling class and a government. They don't call themselves a ruling class, but you need a big government to do these things that you pathetic peasants can't possibly do on your own. And then they keep repeating things that are designed to scare people, make them scared of crime, make them scared of drugs, make them scared of foreigners, make them scared of poverty, make them scared of, run down the list of real or imaginary things to be scared of, and tell the people that unless you give us power over you, your life is going to be horrible and it'll be hell on earth and all that. It'll be anarchy, the bad kind of anarchy. And so that propaganda has been around for centuries. And it works, and people are scared of freedom, and most people still clamor to be dominated by a government, which is pretty sad.
So what would you recommend an anarchist? Like, would you recommend them to throw themselves in discussions all the time with statists, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think it's important, like especially when the truth is uncomfortable and unpopular, that's especially when you have to state it. Because I know a lot of people, and I can understand this, a lot of people are hesitant to, like, I don't want to bring it up with my family and friends, and they're not going to agree anyway, and they'll just get mad at me and blah, 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 blah. But if they don't ever hear it from anybody, they're not going to question what they've always assumed. They're not going to question what they do always hear from the news and the media and the government and all that. They have to hear a different opinion, or they're never going to think about a different opinion. And so I think it's important to step outside our comfort zone and, try to mostly be polite and calm and rational and explain it, and expect them to not respond well to it, because to begin with, at least, because when somebody hears something that completely conflicts with what they've always believed, they're not just going to go, oh, you're right, I'm going to completely change everything I've ever believed my whole life. They're going to resist. They're going to say, that can't be right. If that was right, we'd all know it already. We'd all believe it already. So they have to hear it a lot of times. Most people have to hear it a lot of times before they'll even think about it. But they have to hear it the first time. So even if you're just the first time they hear about it and they go, that's nonsense, that was still important, because there has to be a first and then a second and a third, and until at some point they think, maybe there's something to this. Maybe we don't need a ruling class. Maybe there is another way. Maybe government really isn't worth all the damage it does, and there's a better way to arrange society. So, and I've been a voluntarist for over 20 years now. And for the first 10 years, almost nobody paid attention. And now we have events like this where there's hundreds of anarchists hanging around and talking about how to spread the ideas and how to, circumvent government controls and all sorts of things. So it's definitely spreading. And I think it's a mistake for people to say, well, I said it once and nobody paid attention, so I stopped saying it. You have to keep saying it over and over and over and over again. And history shows that new ideas only take over when they're repeated over and over and over again, until normal people have to start considering that maybe everything they've thought their whole lives is actually wrong.
Like, how is it when you're invited to a party and people tell, like, oh, Trump, he will care about this and this? Like, do you throw yourself in discussions, or can you hold yourself back?
I actually, a lot of times I will avoid those situations because I won't stay quiet. I won't sit there and let people repeat what I think are dangerous, destructive ideas. I'm going to correct them, and they're not going to like it. And sometimes I'll even say, like, if I'm standing there, I'll say, you probably don't want to know what I have to say. Like, if you do, then ask, and I will tell you, but you're not going to be happy about it. And we're going to get into an argument, which I'm perfectly fine with. And if you want to kick me out now so that doesn't happen, be my guest. But I'm not going to sit here and remain quiet as you advocate stuff that I believe is destructive and immoral. I'm going to challenge it. I'm going to disagree. So yeah, I do that. And I do it in person, and I do it online. I'm a little bit more polite in person than I am online. But I think it's important. I mean, and you could use that example of anything, of slavery, of all sorts of oppression. Like, if you think back to the people who lived in those days, the time to speak out is when most people hadn't even thought about it. And when most people thought, oh, slavery is perfectly okay. And the abolitionists were the ones who said, no, it isn't. And we know you all think that. And yeah, we know it's been around for hundreds of years and it's accepted and blah, blah, blah. And we have whole industries based on it. But it's immoral and it should end right now. And mostly people screamed at them and said, yeah, you're horrible and stupid. And who will pick the cotton? But there had to be somebody starting that. There had to be the people who at first said what nobody else believed and what nobody else had thought of. And then they say it over and over again until you get to the point where everybody recognizes slavery as evil. And then you have to go to the next injustice and start speaking out against that. So it really is, it's a moral imperative to speak out, even when you know people aren't going to like it and they're not going to agree and they might get mad at you and things like that, because it's, you have to keep spreading the message until they're forced to look at it and forced to reconsider what they always assumed because it was never challenged.
I'm not sure if you said it in your talk, but I always think it's important to try to see the world from the eyes of the guy you're talking to. I think, and you also have to be very respectful. Otherwise, people won't invite you to their parties anymore.
Right. And it's funny because I did a seminar earlier in the week that was about that sort of thing, and not starting the discussion as if you're an evil bad guy, but you're someone who means well and has good intentions. However, you've been taught things that are basically tricking you into advocating things that don't even match what you believe, that don't even match your own moral code. But then I also do talks like this morning, which are more in your face and openly condemning authoritarian injustice. And I like both. I like both approaches. And I think it's however many different ways the message can be put out there, the more the merrier. Because some people respond to the gentle, polite explanations, and some people need that in-your-face challenge to what they've always assumed and believed, and they need someone to say, you're advocating evil. You may be a good person, but, from all the indoctrination you've received and the authoritarian stuff and the nationalism and all that, you're cheering for stuff that just isn't good. And it's not about freedom and it's not about justice, and you need to stop it. And so some people, and I think that was true of me, I needed it more challenged bluntly. And I needed, the idea thrown in my face that I was actually accidentally being one of the bad guys, not because I'm evil at heart, but because I was tricked into believing authoritarianism. And I was a statist for many, many years, and eventually figured out, wow, I'm cheering for the bad guys. Maybe I should stop doing that. And that's been true of every nasty regime. It was good people cheering for it because they didn't understand, because they were brainwashed into authoritarianism. They didn't, nobody says, rah, 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 let's get the evil guy in power. They all think, well, it's for the nation or the common good, or it's protecting us or something. So it's, if evil empires were only supported by evil people, they would never exist. They have to trick the good people into funding them and going along with them and cooperating with them. And so if the good people just see through the lies, that's the end of most oppression, because the number of truly individually malicious people is not very big, not big enough to build a giant empire. So if you stop the good people from being tricked, that's the end of most injustice.
Like we see now the refugee crisis going on in Europe, and people, it feels like for me, people are more like, they're just two sides, let them in and let them stay out. So what's your position on this topic?
Well, that's, once again, it's one of those things that comes down to principle. Like, I don't particularly want lots of people who speak a different language and have a different culture barging into my neighborhood. However, the principle is I don't have the right to initiate violence to stop people stepping over the imaginary line called a national border. I do have the right to tell people who can be on my property and who can't. But I don't, the fact that I was born in Pennsylvania doesn't mean I get to decide who can set foot in Montana 3,000 miles away just because, well, I'm an American, blah, blah, blah. So it's a perfect example of something where as soon as people are scared of something, and it can be a real something, like, oh, we're scared of all these people coming here and they might be nasty or violent or whatever, whether they're imagining that or whether it's real, if people will run to government to have it solve things as soon as they're scared, you get the cycle of power over and over again. One empire is replaced by another. This is when it matters most that people say, I'm kind of scared of this, and I'm not stepping away from these principles, I'm still going to be the good guy. I'm still going to practice non-aggression. I'm still going to recognize the self-ownership of everybody else. I'm not going to say, well, that whole group of people, I'm kind of scared of them, so I'm going to initiate violence against all of them because some of them might do something bad. I mean, that's the excuse for all statism everywhere. That's always been the excuse for tyranny is, oh, we better have this massive amount of government power because otherwise bad things might later happen. And it's times like this when people are scared that it's the test to see who actually has principles and who's just going to say, all right, we better have government. We better have a big authoritarian savior, and Daddy Trump is going to save us. And it's sad to see some people going that direction. But at the same time, there's still thousands of people who saw through that and said, no, whether your fears are justified or not, we're not going to be the bad guys. We're not going to suddenly turn into the power-happy authoritarians because we're scared of somebody else. We're going to stick to the principles, and we will defend ourselves if attacked, but we're not going to become attackers because we're scared of some group over there, whether it's the Russians or the immigrants or the Mexicans or the Germans.